بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وسلم. We've got 1 minute. In that 1 minute, I'll just do a quick reminder. So, Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the ability to be students of knowledge. We're always students of knowledge, and He's given us the ability to learn more, and He's given us the ability to be consistent. The best of actions. Because they are the most beneficial are those that are consistent. When someone is consistent in something, they derive the most benefit from it. And we see this as being Quran teachers. You see, sometimes, subhanAllah, you'll get a student that is extremely eager and has, so much potential, but isn't consistent. And their lack of consistency, you'll see, you get another student that maybe isn't as talented to some respects, but is consistent, is very consistent. It might do little bits and pieces over a long period of time, and subhanAllah, over that duration, they subhanAllah, they achieve so much. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep us consistent, and He has kept us consistent in regards to this alim that we're learning. So over the many weeks, we've finally reached our last week of our studies in Uloom al-Quran. Last week, I provided a bit more revision, just so this week I can finish it off. So we've covered everything that we covered last week. This week will be us looking at the last two topics. So today's topics, or today what we'll be looking at is two different topics, which are again all these, like we've said, all these topics are, you can draw into them for weeks on their own. So alhamdulillah, this is obviously an introductory course to the Uloom of Quran. So we'll keep it very, very brief. Today we're looking at the different recitations of the Quran, known as the Qiraa'aat, and we're also looking at the i'jaz of the Quran, the miraculous nature of the Quran. So to start us off, we will look at the Qiraa'aat. We'll start off with the Qiraa'aat of the Quran and the different Qiraa'aat of the Quran. I might wait a moment, see if more people want to join. Okay, so we'll get into it. The Qiraa'at of the Quran, and a lot of us have maybe come across these or heard of these, or might be a bit familiar with them. But what are the Qiraa'at of the Quran, or the different Qiraa'at of the Quran, are the various ways, and I guess the various ways and manners in which the Quran can be recited. Like the different methodologies that the Quran can be recited. And what we're going to look at today are the 10 main Qiraa'at of the Quran, the 10 accepted Qiraa'at of the Quran. The Arabic language is very vast. It's very, very, very vast. And at the time of the Arabs, there was many dialects. There was many dialects. And the Quran was revealed to accommodate these differences. So when the Quran was revealed, especially in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, then it was revealed in a way that accommodated to the different dialects that the Arabs knew within its recitation. And like we said, from the Qiraa'at that we have, there is 10. There are 10, and these 10 Qiraa'at are named after the 10 Qaris, what we call Qaris. So what I wanted to do in this lesson is just for our understanding is name those 10 Qaris, and maybe look at one or two of them. So the 10 Qaris that we have are the first of them, again, and their order isn't indicative of anything, but these are just the ways that a lot of the time they're mentioned. So the first one that we have is Nafi', and Nafi' was from Medina. So Nafi', they call him Nafi' al-Madani. So the first Qari that we have is Nafi' al-Madani. The second Qari that we have is Ibn Kathir, and he was from Mecca. So Ibn Kathir al-Makki. Ibn Kathir al-Makki, he was the second one. The third Qari is Abu Amr al-Basri, who was again from Basra. So Abu Amr al-Basri. The third one. And I'm obviously I'm saying it so if whoever wishes to write their names down, can write their names down. The fourth Qari that we have is Ibn Amir al-Shami. Ibn Amir al-Shami. He was from al-Sham. Ibn Amir. The fifth one, which I hope we've all heard of, is Asim al-Kufi. He was from Kufa. Asim al-Kufi. I'm going to come back to Asim and just give a bit more attention to him. Then the sixth one we have Hamza al-Kufi. Hamza al-Kufi. Number 6 we have as a Qari Hamza al-Kufi. Number 7 we have Abu Hassan al-Kisai. Abu Hassan al-Kisai. Number 8 we have Abu Ja'far, who was also from Medina. So Abu Ja'far al-Madani. Abu Ja'far al-Madani. Number 9 we have Ya'qub al-Basri. Ya'qub al-Basri. And number 10 we have Khalaf. So again, I'm going to go over it again. So our Qiraa'aat are the various ways in which the Quran can be recited. And the 10 Qiraa'aat that we have are named after the Qari at that time, which is one the Qari who they're named after. Okay. I'm going to mention them all very quickly again. First one we have, who we mentioned, was Nafi' al-Madani. We have Ibn Kathir al-Makki. We have Abu Amr al-Basri. We have Ibn Amir al-Shami. We have Asim al-Kufi. We have Hamza al-Kufi. We have Abu Hassan al-Kisai. We have Abu Ja'far al-Madani, Ya'qub al-Basri, and Khalaf. So there are 10 prominent reciters, or the 10 prominent reciters or qaris of the Quran. So we might have heard of them. So that's the agreed upon for the 10 main qaris of the Quran. From them, there's 2 that I wanted to focus on. From them, we'll look at Nafi' al-Madani. Only because these are some of the names that are, I guess, a bit more popular than the other ones, and their recitation is utilized a lot more nowadays. Nafi' was the main qari, but then there was famous narrators that took on his recitation of the Quran, and we got to keep in mind, just so we don't get mixed up, all these qira'at were directly from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So no one brought anything new or changed anything or recited that other than it was recited at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So all these were recited at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Nafi' had from his, there was 2 main, what we call rawis, who took on or were famous for this recitation, and of them we have Qalun, and we have Warsh, Imam Warsh. So 2 of the very famous, narrators of the Nafi' recitation are Qalun and Warsh. And we find this recitation, more popular around the North Africa region. And some of us might have heard maybe a reciter on YouTube, or maybe if we're at the mosque or listening to a lecture or whatever it is, they might pronounce or they might recite Warsh. But of the most prominent, or the most prominent, the most utilized, and the most, the qira'ah that we're all, the vast majority of the Muslims could say easy over 90% recite, is the recitation of Asim. And from Asim, again, there was 2, prominent narrators that took on his recitation and the way that he recited the Quran. And of them, we have Hafs ibn Sulaiman, and we have Shu'bah. we should all know, being Quran teachers, that the recitation that we teach, and the recitation, unless someone teaches others, another, is Hafs and Asim. So when we say Hafs and Asim, we say that we're recitation, we're reciting the Quran according to Hafs, according to Asim, through Hafs. So Hafs came after Asim, but he was, I guess, one of the famous, or maybe one of the most prominent reciters of the Asim Qiraa'ah. And so when we say Hafs and Asim, I recite the Quran of Asim through Hafs alayhi salam, radiallahu anhu. But our sanad, especially when it comes to the Quran, and this is what the one I wanted to look at, is directly back to the Prophet ﷺ. And every single one of these qaris goes back to the Prophet ﷺ. Obviously, they weren't Sahaba, so they didn't hear it, but there would have been maybe 1 or 2 generations. But if we look at the sanad of Hafs and Asim, we have, so from us, we'll have Hafs, then Hafs learned from Asim, and Asim learned from one of the most prominent tabi'in, who was a great tabi'in. His name was Abu Abdul Rahman as-Sulami. That name we might have heard of, Abu Abdul Rahman as-Sulami. And Abu Abdul Rahman as-Sulami was, again, like I said, a tabi'i, and he had obviously many great teachers from the Sahaba. Just to mention a few of them: Ali ibn Abi Talib, Uthman ibn Affan, and Ubay bin Ka'ab. Okay, so as we can see, there's only a handful of, I guess, 1 or 2 generations between those chains. And obviously, the Sahaba recited the Quran from, or received the Quran from the Prophet ﷺ, who received it from Jibreel alayhi salam, who received it from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's that's our chain of narration, especially when it comes to the Qiraa'at. I wanted to look at some of the benefits of the Qiraa'at. What benefits do we get out of the Qiraa'at? Why do we have them? And what benefits do we get out of them? So, the Qiraa'at are there. So if we look at the first benefit would be that it helps us with the recitation of the Quran. More prominent at the time when it was revealed, but even nowadays, it helps with the recitation of the Quran. So, Arabia at the time, this is going to be a common thing, especially when we look into the Hijaz as well. Arabia at the time was, especially Mecca, was, they prided themselves on their elegance in Arabic. And Mecca was obviously the house of pilgrimage, or the city of pilgrimage. So people would come from, all the Arabs would come and come to Mecca. So the Quraysh, and as we have in another, so they acquired all the best aspects of that language, and they developed that language to become such a pure and, I guess, elegant language. And in that, so a lot of Arabs, or the Meccans or the Quraysh, they became very elegant in their recitation of the Quran. But it's important to note that, the Qiraa'at, especially when it comes to the Qiraa'at, the meaning wasn't, everyone understood the dialect of Quraysh. Everyone understood the dialect of Quraysh. But they might have had, a bit of troubles in how to pronounce some of the words, like a slang. So you could give an example, like different slangs that we have of English, for instance. So, the Quran was revealed in a way that it made it easy for those that wanted to recite the Quran. There was a bit of ease in that in the way that they could pronounce certain words. So the first benefit is that it helps with the recitation of the Quran. Another benefit that we have, that it helps with the memorization of the Quran. Again, similar. So when they went to memorize the Quran, it was in a way, it was revealed in a way that it was easy for them to memorize it, because they were familiar with the way that it was recited. From a tafsir perspective, and I know a lot of tafsir, as we said in a prior lecture, especially when it comes to tafsir, is that some of the tafsir, or a lot of the tafsir, they focus on different aspects. And we look into some of the tafsir, they focus on the comparison of the qira'at. So from a tafsir perspective, the qira'at provide extra layers of tafsir and understanding the Quran. So that's another benefit we get from the qira'at. So the first one we said is that it helps with the recitation of the Quran. It eases our memorization of the Quran. It provides an extra layer of meaning and tafsir. And another one would be that it proves the miraculous nature of the Quran, which is what we're going to get into next. How does it prove the miraculous nature of the Quran? As there's different qira'at, so you come across certain words that are pronounced differently, but even in their different pronunciation, they don't contradict each other. So even in their different pronunciation, so for instance, we can use the word Malik and Malik. One means king and the other one means the one that, for instance, has authority to do. So you might think, well, it is in the same thing, but technically it isn't, because a king doesn't always have the authority to do his own thing, and a person that always or a person that has authority to do it as they wish isn't always a king. But when you combine these two qira'at of Malik and Maliki, then you can actually, they don't contradict each other. So even though they have a different meaning, their meanings are not contradictive in any way. And the last one, it actually proves the truthfulness of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Oh no, our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was illiterate, and that is not a criticism of him in any way whatsoever, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But it provides a proof of the Quran being from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he proves the truthfulness of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was an illiterate Prophet ﷺ, yet he received word that accommodated to all the different Arab tribes and all the different Arab dialects. So there's some of the benefits that we derive from the different qira'at that we have. So the first one, like I mentioned, it helps with the ease of the recitation of the Quran. It helps with the memorization of the Quran. It provides another layer of meaning of the Quran. It's a proof to the miraculous nature of the Quran. And the last one was, it proves the truthfulness of our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They're our qira'at. They're all accepted. So there's no which one is preferred over the other. They're all directly linked to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The next topic we wanted to look at today is the miraculous nature of the Quran. I'jaz al-Quran. So the miraculous nature of the Quran. Before we go into this, I wanted to actually look at what is a miracle. So what is a miracle? In our notes there, we've got 4 points that we look at. So the first one, it's an extraordinary event. It's something extreme. It's an event that, I guess, it goes against the natural order of things. So a miracle is something that if logic tells you this has to happen, e.g., for example, fire burns, a miracle would be that if I put my hand in fire, my hand doesn't burn. That's an example, because fire burns. So it goes against the laws of nature. And the next point to a miracle, or something being a miracle, is it has to be accompanied by a challenge. And we're looking at a miracle given to prophets. So miracles are only given to prophets. Miracles are only given to prophets. And when we say the word i'jaz, it's only given to a prophet. So when a prophet brought a miracle, it was accompanied with a challenge. So for instance, we can use the example of Musa alayhi salam, who challenged the sorcerers at the time to produce the magic or the seeming what he did. So he challenged them. This is what I'm doing. Now see if you can do the same thing. So it's not just, oh, look, it's fancy. It's challenging certain people. Also from a miracle is that Allah subhanahu it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives it to his prophets. So the prophets don't have the ability to do it per se in and of themselves, but it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's given as to help with the message. So a miracle isn't given as for the sake of a miracle. It's given there to help the message that the prophet came with. And like we said, the last one sort of links with that as well. It helps to convince the people of the truth of their message. So it's there to provide, to grab people's attention because they're doing something supernatural, and then people are more reluctant to, or are more, I guess, can listen to the race, will listen to that message a bit easier. So from the examples that we have of miracles, there's many. Maybe all the prophets came with miracles, and we can list some of them, I guess, more prominent ones from the Quran, as the story of Musa alayhi salam, who was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him to throw down his staff, and that staff turned into a snake. Like we said, that was accompanied with the challenge of, when he was in the court of Fir'aun, he told the sahirin, the sorcerers, to also throw down. So there was a challenge accompanied with that. And we all know the story where those sorcerers, they were, their sorcery was nothing in comparison to Musa actually changing the stick into a snake. It was a real snake, and we all know that they immediately submitted to that. So he brought a miracle, and not everyone submitted to the miracle. Not everyone believed in the miracle, but these sorcerers, they seen the true nature of the miracle. Another example would be Ibrahim alayhi salam, who was flung into the fire. Fire burns. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as a miracle to Ibrahim alayhi salam, he changed the quality of the fire from burning to make a cooling coming. Subhanallah. So that's another miracle. Another miracle would be, for instance, the miracle of Isa alayhi salam to bring the dead back to life, or to cure the sick people. They're miracles that Prophet didn't, I guess, do of his own, but it was a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to strengthen the case and the message that Prophet brought with him. And when we look at, for instance, at the time of Musa alayhi salam, there was a time of magic. That they prided, especially the Egyptians at the time, they prided themselves on their ability to do magic. At the time of Isa alayhi salam, they were at the peak of their medical studies, and they had cures for things. So when Isa alayhi salam came, he came with something of what they're doing, but he did it in a way that they could not do it. Same with Musa alayhi salam. He came at a time where they were doing magic, but he did it in a way that they could not do it. And likewise with the Quran, we said the Quran is miraculous. The Quran is miraculous in that it came at a time where the Arabs, like we said, were at the peak of their language, absolute peak of their language. And they prided themselves on the elegance of the language and the purity of the language that they had. And because they prided themselves with that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gave the Prophet ﷺ, and the greatest miracle of the Prophet ﷺ is the Quran. Not to say that the Prophet ﷺ, that's the only miracle that he had. He had many other miracles. For example, splitting the moon. Another example is when the Prophet ﷺ, a Sahaba would invite him over, and there was a very small amount of food, and he blessed that food, and a whole army would eat from that food. So many examples of the Prophet ﷺ doing miracles. But the greatest miracle is the miracle of the Quran. It's the everlasting miracle. Everlasting miracle, because we still have it today, and we're still benefiting from its miracles till today. So the greatest miracle of the Prophet ﷺ is Al-Quran. And like we said, the Quran it's extraordinary because there's nothing that can be produced like it. And it has a challenge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala several times has given a challenge to those people to say, if you can provide anything like the Quran, and it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it strengthens the message of deen. What we wanted to look at today is, and there's many features of the Quran that make it miraculous. Many features of the Quran that make it miraculous, but we're going to look at four, and I'm going to try to give an example for each one of those. So the Quran is miraculous in many ways. The first example that we're going to look at is that we have written on our notes, it's knowledge of the unseen. When I spoke to Hajj Belal about his notes, we decided that maybe we can change that to probably make it prophecies. So the Quran, one of its miraculous natures is that it has prophecies, or it has real predictions in it. And the example that we've written there, and I wanted to give a bit of detail on, was the fate of the Romans. So the Romans will be defeated. So the Quran provided, I'll go through the story. So for instance, before Islam, so we all know Surat Uloom, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'll go into it. So before Islam, the Persians attacked the Romans. So the two superpowers at the time were the Persians and the Romans. So there was an instance before Islam that the Persians attacked the Romans. And when they attacked them, and obviously they had a war or whatever it was, the Persians actually conquered a part of Syria, that Syria area that belonged to the Romans. Years had passed, and just before Hijrah, so just before the Prophet ﷺ made Hijrah, the Romans attacked again. So they said, well, let us attack again, and they to get their land, but they also lost. So the Romans attacked again to gain their land back, and they lost. This caused celebration for the Meccans. So the Quraysh at the time, who were non-Muslims, they celebrated because they were siding with the Persians, because they believed, oh, look, the Persians are closer to us, they're fire worshippers, we're idol worshippers. And the Muslims sort of sided with the Romans because, you know, they were Christian, they were closer, they had that sort of Abrahamic religion. So they sided with them in that regards. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after that event, He reveals the revelation of Surat Rum, the first part, and one can go to it and look at it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala predicts the victory of the Romans over the Persians in a handful of years, so between 3 to 9 years. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes that prediction. And it was used at the time to ridicule the Muslims as if that's going to happen, so on and so forth. But after a handful of years, that event actually came to be true, where the Romans again attacked and actually were victorious over the Persians, as was mentioned in the Quran. So that's one aspect of, I guess, the miraculous nature of the Quran. It made predictions, and in those predictions, we see, even within the time of the Prophet ﷺ, we see the prediction coming true. Another example that we have over here is that it's miraculous in stories of the prophets. It's miraculous in that it shares knowledge of the stories of the prophets. The Prophet ﷺ was in Arabia, and he didn't necessarily, there was no way, or a lot of information about previous nations and previous prophets didn't come to him. The only way they came to him is through the Quran. So, you know, the different religions at the time would prompt the Prophet ﷺ, would prompt Quraysh and say, well, ask him about this person, or ask him about this person. And one beautiful example would be, for instance, when they asked about Yusuf alayhi salam. We're all familiar with, I guess, the story of Yusuf. That wasn't a prophet that the Arabs were familiar with. It was not a prophet that the Arabs were familiar with. They never probably had ever heard of him. But when they prompted him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gave, and we've all read Surat Yusuf, it's maybe one of the most detailed stories in the Quran. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then provided knowledge to a man and a people that absolutely had no knowledge. It's like, for instance, going to, you know, so I've heard certain scholars say, well, so going to, if you have like a tribe nowadays that live in the Amazon or something, and get them, and they don't have knowledge, they don't have library, they don't have, nowadays we don't really see this because we have, knowledge is so easy. You just pick up and Google has all the answers, right? It's easy for us to get that knowledge. Whereas back then, imagine a tribe that was all on its own, secluded. Like today, we can imagine maybe a tribe in the Amazon or a tribe in one of the deserts that don't have access to all this information, and then they come out, and no one's ever, you know, we touch base with them for the first time, and then they start to recite to us different constitutional rights, and they start to give us information about technology, and you'll be like, where did you get that from? Nowadays we can understand, but back then that information wasn't shared. It wasn't as easy to share information as it was now. So now the Prophet ﷺ is giving these stories about these prophets and events that took place that there was no possible way for him to have received that knowledge. So it's miraculous in that the stories that he shares, and we all know the detail of Surat Yusuf alayhi salam. And again, it's not contradictory in any way. The Quran in its miraculous nature is not contradictory in any way. The third aspect, so the first one we said it's prophecies. The second one we said in that it shares stories of previous prophets or past prophets. The third one is it's miraculous in its nature. It's miraculous in its language, in the Arabic language. This one, it's hard to explain this one in the sense that we're not Arab speakers. We're not Arab speakers. The best way I like to understand this one It's to look at those people that were so elegant in Arabic. Like we said, the Arabs were at the peak of their language, and amongst them, to be a high-standing citizen and to have power and to have, influence, you had to be elegant in Arabic. So one of those people that was extremely elegant, you could say, for instance, Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira. So the father of Khalid ibn al-Walid was one of the big enemies of Islam. He was one of the most elegant of speakers and orators at the time. At that time, and you hear their narrations that when they heard this Quran, they didn't have an excuse. Their immediate response was how great these words were. How great was it? They actually didn't have any criticism towards the words of the Quran. They couldn't criticize the words of the Quran and the way that it was written and how great it was. So what would they result to? They resort to criticizing the Prophet ﷺ. No, you're not a messenger. But for them to say, or they would say, it's sorcery, or whatever, they come up with all the excuses, but none of the excuses was to fault the Quran. It was to say that it's supernatural in its language, because no human being can produce something like this. Another great example would be the example of Umar radiallahu anhu. Who, when he became Muslim, he was actually on his way to assassinate the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Umar again is one of the elegant speakers at the time. So as he's on his way to assassinate the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we all know the story where he gets one of the Sahaba sees him who hadn't proclaimed his Islam yet, and he said, "Where are you after this? I'm going to kill on my way to kill Muhammad." I said, "Why do you do that? Why don't you go and look at your family? Go do with your family first." He says, "What do you mean?" He says, "Your sister and your brother-in-law." Obviously, he did it to protect the Prophet ﷺ. So then Umar gets even angry and he makes his way to his sister's house. And then when he gets there, he beats up his sister and he beats up his brother-in-law until he calms down a little bit. And after he calms down a little bit, he says, "Well, you know what, at least let me listen to this." And he hears some verses of Surah Taha, and immediately the Quran is that miraculous, it's that beautiful, it's that great in its nature, and it's that elegant in its Arabic, that he couldn't help himself, and he became Muslim on the spot. So that's just two examples of that. Umar radiallahu anhu, he accepted it, that he knew it was miraculous and knew it couldn't be from a human being. Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira also accepted the idea that it was supernatural, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't put in his heart for him to accept that it was from Allah. And the last one that we look at, I guess a lot of the time when we look at the miraculous nature of the Quran, and the Quran is a miracle, we sort of fall into the idea it's scientifically miraculous. It's not miraculous in its I'm going to rephrase that. It's not a miracle because of its scientific predictions, but even though its scientific predictions are one aspect of it being miraculous. Okay? And this is easy for us to understand in the sense of we see science around us. It's the era of science. Language is sort of lost. We're not as elegant in our language, whether it's English or any other language, as we were in previous generations. But now, I guess, society prides itself on its scientific advancements. So the Quran, likewise, will provide some sort of, it has I guess, a scientific element of its miraculous nature. And one example, for instance, we could use is how it describes the mountains. And it describes the mountains as pegs. How could the Prophet ﷺ or anyone at that time know that the mountains are used as pegs? Now one needs to do a simple Google search or pick up any book on mountains to know that the majority of mountains, the vast majority of the mountain is under the ground and it's pegging the wall together as a peg does. How did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how could have the Prophet ﷺ given such a description of a mountain as a peg if it wasn't from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So they're the four main features or the four main elements of the Quran being miraculous in its nature. Through its predictions, through its stories of past prophets, through its amazing language, and through its scientific knowledge more now. But just to add to that also, other aspects that we look at or the ulama look at how is the Quran miraculous in its nature, it's preservation. You can't go back you can't go past the idea that the Quran is preserved. How? There's no other book that is preserved like the Quran. No other book that is preserved to the letter, that is preserved to the harakah, that is preserved to the way that we recite it. No other book is preserved like the Quran. Not just your scriptures, any book, no book is preserved like the Quran is preserved. And that's obvious. And we just spoke about the Qiraa'aat. It's preserved in every single aspect, and within those preservations, there is no contradictions. So that's another way that the scholars look at how is it miraculous. Another way that it is miraculous is in its ease to be memorized. What other book can be memorized like the Quran? And this is the Prophet ﷺ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised us that He will make it easy for He will safeguard its preservation, and the Huffaz are part of the preservation of the Quran. So it's ease in memorization. You can't memorize any other book. And I know we say it as Muslims, but you sometimes when you're memorizing something, you see the nature of it. How did I memorize that? How can I? It's amazing. It's amazing the fact that a kid, 7 years old, 10 years old, cannot memorize anything else. You tell him what did he ate 10 minutes ago and he can't tell you, but he can memorize the whole Quran. From cover to cover, 600 pages. No other book. The only book, if every written thing was destroyed, the only book that we could put together within a few days, if not a day, written up and everything again, would be the Quran. No other book could anyone do it dot for dot. SubhanAllah. So that's part of the miracle of the Quran. And the last one, which is, I guess, another beautiful aspect of it, is that its reciter does never tires from the recitation of the Quran. How many times did we read Surat Al-Fatiha? How many times did we read Surat Al-Ikhlas? How many times did we read all these surah and make khatam? And I never get bored of it. Not just me, the scholars or any individual. I will read it and I will read it and I will read it, and I love to read it every single time. And we love to read it even more. What other book can one read 10, 20, 30, 50, 1,000 times in their lifetime? Which other book? No other book. So this is part of the miraculous nature of the Quran. All these link back to the Quran being from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's miraculous because it reminds us of the nature of its miracle. Leads us back to the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is what its key message is, as all the other prophets brought their miracles, brought their miracles to enhance the message that prophet came with, as does the Quran. It enhances our ideas that it is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that is its nature of that's the miraculous nature. So to wrap it up, we looked at the Qiraa'aat and the 10 prominent qaris, and we looked at the Qiraa'aat of the different ways in and the manner in which the Quran can be recited. We listed the 10 qaris, which I won't go through again. One can just, if anyone missed writing them, I guess you can just go over the recording. And then we looked at the benefits of the different, or why we have different qira'at. And we looked at the miraculous nature of the Quran. We looked at what a miracle is. So something that occurs supernatural, a supernatural occurrence on the hands of a prophet. And we looked at just four or more aspects of how the Quran is miraculous. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we've come to an end. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward us all for our consistency in this. Just wanted to note, we will have I guess a small exam in the coming weeks. We'll send that information over to you guys for our ability to get, I guess, an ijazah and further, I guess, pass this knowledge on to others. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this knowledge a means for us to get closer to His word, and let it be a means of us to get nearer to Him. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala benefit us and many of us, and all those that we teach and all those that we come across. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you all for your consistency. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanallah wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Jazakallah khair.